Welcome to the Parent Guide to GCSE podcast, and today's guest is James Hawes. He's talking to us about breaking bad news to teenagers. This was originally broadcast as a live Facebook event and can still be found on the Parent Guide to GCSE Facebook page.
Right, well, our first guest then, who's probably going to introduce himself to do a far better job, is James. Hello, James.
Hello, thank you for having me.
So do you want to just give us a quick kind of who you are and what you do?
Sure. I'm James Hawes. I'm based in Nottingham. I'm a counsellor, psychotherapist and counsellor. I have a private practice, a very busy private practice. I also work in school for 2 days a week as a school counsellor, and have been working in schools as a counsellor or a youth worker for the past 25 years. I'm also a trainer, so I train therapists really in terms of working with young people or challenging boys often, and also I kind of specialize in working with men. Recently authored a book as well on men called The Secret Lives of Men.
Awesome. So
Nice.
A wealth of experience there. Fabulous. So I guess we're mostly just going to pick your brains. So at the moment, given the current situation across the country, there's a lot of people having to break bad news about, relatives being diagnosed with COVID, for example, as well as all the other myriad things that we have to break to teenagers at times. So I guess if you've got something particularly, it's going to be bad news, is there an ideal way to broach it as a parent with your child? What are the kind of first steps we should be taking?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, it's always going to be difficult for any of us to break bad news or to receive bad news. And I think for me, one of the things which I've learned about young people and children is that they want us to be frank with them. They want us to be honest with them. They want us to kind of tell it how it is. Recently, I was listening to a lad. He was, I think he was about 12. He realised he didn't know that his parents were splitting up, and they kind of kept it from him to kind of look after him, to look after his feelings. And I had several sessions with him. This is quite a long time after the event, actually. And he was just feeling quite powerless, not knowing. And he was desperate to know what was going on, what happened. And the parents were thinking, oh, we're doing this to look after him or to protect him. But actually, he felt out of the loop. He felt powerless. And so he wanted to know. So I think one of the first things is if there is bad news, let's say it. Let's be direct. Let's not try and cushion it or hide it away. But because I think young people and I'm not into this kind of view that I think a lot of people say, oh, young people, children, young people, they're really resilient. I think, of course, young people can be resilient, but what they're very good at is adapting. They adapt to situations that come their way because ultimately they have to. They're survivors.
Yeah. So just honesty is the best policy, and
Sooner rather than later. So I mean, when you know you have to impart bad news, I think sitting on it from a parent's point of view probably puts additional pressure on yourself, thinking, well, I've had this opportunity to say something now and I've missed that, so I'm going to have to wait for the next window. It is easier, from what you're saying, just to front up, be honest, because they will sense. They're not daft.
Yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely right. I think they will pick it up, and then they may start trying to work out or assuming what's going on with mum and dad, or even, which often happens, I think, for children and young people, them taking responsibility. Have I done something wrong? Is there something going on? So I think absolutely we all I think are fairly good at picking up vibes in the family situation. So absolutely, I think if we can be direct as we can, and of course at any age we often kind of say when will be the right time. And of course, there really isn't a right time, because then there's something else that happens. Oh, we'll tell them in a day or in a week or in a month. And there's never a good time.
Yeah, definitely. I think Carol's just commented she's kind of had a couple of losses in a row, lost her mum, grandmother, and it's just kind of everything, if you'd left it, would have snowballed even worse. So, yeah, very much so.
It's almost like the problem gets bigger and you think, oh my goodness, what am I going to do with this massive weight or this of kind of bad news?
Yeah.
My boys, or our boys, told me a story which I didn't know the other day, that when they lost one of their grandparents, they were at a friend's house at the time, so arrangements were quickly made to go and pick them up from this house. So when the mum picked them up, she didn't say anything. She just popped them in the car and started driving, and they knew that something was up because it was completely out of usual. It just wasn't normal for them to be picked up in that situation at that time. And they're like, Mum, what's up? And she wouldn't say anything. She wanted to sort of get somewhere to then sort of tell them properly, but they knew for that 10 minutes of driving that something dreadful had happened, and that, I think, made it worse because they didn't know what the dreadful point was. So I think to deal with it.
Yeah, there's this awkward, there's just silence, and everybody's kind of working out what is unsaid, what is going to be said, and that is just unhelpful, I think.
Yeah. And so what about in terms of, I mean, a lot of the time, if we're having to break bad news, particularly if we're talking about, relatives' illness or bereavement, often that's not just bad news for them, it's bad news for us. And we're having to manage our emotions around the situation as well. And I know a lot of parents that we speak to talk about feeling like they have to be the strong one to help kind of carry their children through the situation, in terms of, not putting the emotional burden on them, but also showing them that it's okay to be emotional about it. Can you talk around that a little bit?
Yeah, a lot of my work with my clients, with children, young people and adults, is about developing what I call emotional fitness. So what emotional fitness means is to be able to express the right feeling at the right time in the right way to the right person. So if we're in tune with our emotions, if we kind of know what we're feeling, and some of us don't, if we're not emotionally fit, then we can express that feeling. This concept of being strong, I think it's one of those. It's one of those things that's run through society for quite a long while, hasn't it? That to be strong kind of means I shouldn't show any vulnerable feelings. I should be stoical. I should keep them to myself. I think that is unhealthy generally. Now, I think what you're saying, and I think absolutely right, that as a parent, I don't think we should be, we don't want to be flooded with our emotions where, it's almost like our children need to look after us, although there is a time for that as well. But to be able to, so if we were emotionally fit and able to express that right feeling, I don't think that's a flooding. I think it's there's some sad news, and that sad news may mean that I express my sadness. That may mean that that sadness is expressed with tears, and that is okay. Now, what I mean by flooding, if those tears are going on and on and on, that there's somewhere, and of course we might need to do that, but when we're with our children and young people, I think it's absolutely healthy for them to see our sadness and to see our tears, but that actually we also need to be there for their sadness and for their tears. So that holding that balance is never easy, but kind of locking up, right? I'm just going to be strong and stoical. I don't think that is healthy for the adult or for the child, because I think modeling of the full emotional spectrum from parents to children is really, really important, as it is modeling sympathy or empathy or warmth.
Yeah, definitely. We're getting some fab comments through as well. Thank you, Carol. And I'm going to jump in with
and obviously anyone else, if you've got any questions, James is here and he would love to help you out. So please, we've got some questions for him, obviously, but if you've got something to ask them, please fire the comments away.
Indeed. So if you're listening to this on the podcast, I'm sorry you can't ask questions, but I'll read them aloud so you're not missing things because they're on a screen. So Emma says, is trying to keep things as normal as possible the best thing to do, ensuring there is a time for talking things through and emotions appearing?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, Emma, and I think that sense of keeping things normal. I mean, we're in a pandemic. We've never been in a pandemic. I've never been one in my life. It's absolutely crazy, and for children, who ultimately, I mean, however they're managing it is incredible. So, and we're all, I think, trying to manage this the best that we can, but none of us really know what that means. So I think in terms of keeping things, I'm not sure whether normal, but keeping things kind of steady, being able to express, how difficult we may be finding it, but also being able to draw on ways of managing this really difficult time as parents is really important. So I'm just looking at the second part, ensuring there's time for talking things through, and absolutely that. I often, if I'm working with families, I introduce them to a very basic kind of feeling grid, which has kind of got mad, sad, glad, and scared. So the 4 key emotions. And I will often say to the parents and children, if they're in the room, that, have a check-in twice a day after the meal and just say things with the mad, glad, sad, and scared. When was today? When did you feel kind of mad or upset or mad or irritated or frustrated? When did you feel glad? And when did you feel sad or disappointed or hurt? When did you feel anxious or worried? And for me, that kind of little check-in emotional grid can be a really useful little tool for just saying, look, we're all going to be feeling different feelings throughout the day. Absolutely normal. Let's just share them. And to model that as a family is, I think, a really great way of learning and developing family, if you like, emotional fitness.
Love that, yeah.
We go down the positives of the day route, but I quite like the idea of expanding it to sort of explore other aspects of what we've all been up to during the day. There's always things that are going to be stressing you out, making you happy, making you mad. So yeah, I think for me, look, I think my deal on feelings is that there is no positive or negative feeling. They just are. And I think that this route, often we go around with children as well, that, let's be happy, let's stick to the positive, is not a good route for emotional fitness. For me, to actually, if we can express, say, our sadness when we need to be sad, it's a beautiful thing. To allow sadness to flow, it's like we were talking about grieving, we need to do that. Otherwise, it's going to go, I say, look, if we don't express the right feeling, it's going to morph into another feeling. And it could morph often, perhaps, into anger externally or internally. So those vulnerable feelings, the feelings we don't like to show, or maybe we've been told we don't want to see those feelings, that's really important for me, to allow children and young people and ourselves to be able to express, feel and express those feelings. I mean, the reason we went down the positives of the day is we do have one who occasionally has been known to be Captain Negative. So that is very much so we need to drive the positives rather than sort of, make sure he doesn't say anything about, it all being negative. So to explore
balance.
Angles. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and it has worked, but I think if we can add more to it, that's definitely a bonus.
Great.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so we've got a question from Carol, which is slightly off topic, but still, I think, totally relevant and something we'd probably be interested in hearing about as well. So Carol's asked, how do you help a teen that has a fear of bringing this virus home to a sibling that's oxygen and CPAP dependent? So we similarly have someone who's vulnerable in the house, and we were worried about our daughter being worried about bringing the virus home from school. So
yeah, and again, that is a really kind of big kind of feeling to carry, isn't it, for a teen? And it seems to me that in a family like that, it's like I'm sure the family, if that, you know, is it Carol? If Carol's willing to allow her teen to go to school, there's the right precautions have been made. And I suppose being able to help her teenager deal with that is, again, I think, being able to provide an environment where the teenager is able to share their feelings, their real feelings, those feelings of anxiety, and to know that there is empathy, that we get you, we understand you. And I would say that empathy to me is one of the most important emotions or skills, if you like, to be able to foster in our families. And when I say empathy, classically people talk about being able to, it's like literally walking in another person's shoes. What does it mean to be in their world? And I often say in some of the workshops I lead, look, you know, if what we're doing when we're being empathic, we're saying, you matter, you know, I'm going to be with you, only you, for this 15 seconds, even if it's just 15 seconds, it's magic. And empathy really is kind of like magic. You know, I get that all the time in my, with my clients. You know, I'm generally actively listening. I might not be doing anything, saying anything, or giving advice. I'm actively listening. That might be reflecting back to them what I'm hearing. Is that correct? I want to make sure that I'm really getting you. And the clients will leave at the end of the session think, I'm not sure what you did, but that really helped. And what I did was empathy.
Yeah,
and listening, and just the ability to hear what they've got to say, which I think, particularly from looking after from the parental point of view, is really important. So
yeah, I think the temptation as a parent is always to want to jump in and try and fix it, because you want to protect your child. You don't want them to be feeling sad or hurt or anything. So you want to jump in and try and help them get past all these feelings, but you've got to rein that in and let them have their feelings first.
I mean, sometimes I want to jump in and vocalize or almost finish their sentences for them, which I know is not helpful, because you should just be listening to what they're trying to tell you rather than trying to almost put words into their mouth. So I know I am guilty of that.
And I think we probably all are guilty. I can see myself doing that as well. And I often say, in terms of resist the fix, because I think there is a sense of, you know, when we want to be helpful. I mean, I often talk about two types of empathy. And I think as parents, we both of them are important. So the empathy that we've been talking about is called what I'd call emotional centered empathy. So we're just trying to be with them. It's often empathy, I'd say, it's a feeling of uselessness. You know, actually, I'm not doing anything. I'm just being. And so it's embracing uselessness. Now, the other side of it is the other type of empathy is called action-centered empathy. It's a kind of, right, I can do something, I can be active, which I think getting the two in right is really important. But I think as a parent, both action and emotional-centered empathy are both useful tools, if you like, or ways of being that we can draw on.
Fab. So, I mean, I like the way Emma's put it here. She said it's like on Inside Out, the movie. There's a whole lot of feelings just clashing with each other, and that is going to be the case, I think, with most bits of bad news. So,
so I was going to say, well, once you've broken bad news with, I know teenagers obviously aren't all the same, so there's not an easy answer to this, but what are the things to look out for once you have imparted whatever the bad news is? What are the key things to look out for with your teen over the next day, week, month?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It is a really difficult thing, isn't it, in terms of knowing how the other is going to absorb, deal with that bad news. And in terms of look what we look out for, and I suppose part of that I would say is how much we know about our teenager to start with. What do they do? What would they typically do? What are they a loner? Do they go and isolate themselves? What's their, classically their diet like? What's their socialization like in terms of, well, now more if it's online or whatever. So, how much do they talk to us? How much do they want to be with us? For me, what we know of them in a kind of typical situation, and then if they're moving away or withdrawing from those kind of situations, doing something different to what they normally would. I mean, it might just be, I don't want to eat with you anymore, or that's a fairly massive one in many ways. So, but for me, watching out at the top scale, what they do differently. The other part, I suppose, emotionally is, are they available? Do they want to be available to talk? Now, again, I've got 2 older teenage boys living with me. One's fairly self-reliant, I would say, quite quiet and to himself. The other's a lot more active and would like to talk. So for me, I'm just trying to gauge, okay, I've got to take both of these lads at where they're at that moment and what I know about them. But also I want to just drop in that, I'm thinking of you, or if you would like to talk, I'm here. They may not, they may never, but I just want to make myself available for that.
Fab. Somebody else recently, I can't remember who now, I think it was one of our podcast guests, advocated if you've got to have a difficult conversation with your child, then sometimes a good way to think about it is to think about it like a driver and passenger. So you're sat next to each other in the car, or you're out for a walk together, so you're side by side rather than being face to face, because it takes away the pressure to moderate what your face is then saying when you're listening, so the teenagers aren't worried about what they're conveying, and you're not worried about what you're conveying so much. Is that something that sounds reasonable to you as well?
Yeah, well, I think yes, it's familiar to me. I think this I would call that non-direct kind of contact. Classically, people have said, and I've taught myself, in terms of, if you want to talk to a boy particularly, then take them for a drive, play a game, football or whatever, and just talk so it's not just sitting directly. However, I suppose, look, I'm a therapist. I work in what was a predominantly, and still was until about 3 years ago, an all boys school. It's co-ed now, but boys are absolutely capable of sitting in a room with me for 35 minutes in direct contact, with eye contact, and so they're quite capable of doing it. But I think, both and.
Whereas I know I'm rubbish at the car conversations. I've only come a cropper once. I was driving to the swimming pool with my daughter. She was in the front seat, and probably about 30 seconds before we got to the swimming pool car park, she said, I understand how babies look like the mum, but I don't understand how they look like the dad. How does that work then, Dad? And I kind of obviously flustered for about 10 seconds and then turned into oh, look how busy it is. We must rush into the swimming pool now. So I am not in any way, shape or form the person to really use an example here. I am rubbish. She's about 9 at the time.
Okay, all right. Yeah.
I'm very much an advocate of just straight to the point. I will have the conversation with her, and I will use the words as necessary, and it might make me want to die inside a little bit, but I'd rather she asked me than asked her friends. So
yes. Great.
That's why you're the adult here.
Just not been accused of that before. Okay,
so Pamela, that's I know that I do it, but it is an important thing to. Shall I just flash it on the screen quickly? So
James, you have to read it out as well. Because
do I? Yeah.
Podcast.
So it's hard not to jump in, as I was talking about earlier on, but to finish their sentences. the adults need to try as best as they possibly can not to jump in. So letting the child know that what is important is being said. So
yeah, definitely.
I really should put my glasses on so I can read properly. But
you're wearing your glasses. Well, you mean your other glasses?
Yeah.
In terms of, so we've talked about things to watch out for. So you've delivered your bad news and you're keeping an eye on your child and whether, how well they seem to be coping and things. What are the steps that we should be then taking as parents if it's becoming really apparent that they're not coping well with it? What can we do? Because obviously there's CAMS that can help in schools, but it's massively underfunded and there's a huge waiting list, and finding the right therapist is obviously a challenge that parents then kind of have to get past. What are the steps we should be taking?
Well, yeah, as you're talking, I'm thinking, this is a really difficult one, isn't it? Because look, I'm a school counsellor, and what I do know is that there are a lot of school counsellors, but of course not all schools have school counsellors. So if I was often say, if there's a school counsellor, then you're likely to be seen by the school counsellor quicker than CAMS. Absolutely you are. And where I am based in Nottingham, there's a long waiting list, and CAMS tend to now take people, certainly in Nottingham, it's often young people with eating disorders and things like that. So for me, that would be the first port of call. But equally, we would, if I'm not there, we would offer in Nottingham, we're lucky enough to have other agencies in the area. So we have the specific area, it's called Base 51, specifically works with young people, and they, I think, take young people quite quickly. So there may be other agencies, physical agencies. If not, there is a very good agency online, and they do physical as well, and they work in lots of different areas all over the country, and it's called Kooth. I don't know if anybody's come across Kooth, K-O-O-T-H. They will do online counselling, and as far as I know, they've got a fairly good turnaround. So you're able to see a counsellor like children, teenagers. It's anonymous. You can just do a chat online, or you can organise a proper session. But they are very good, and they've got a lot of, I think, local council contracts to deliver counselling services in areas. So absolutely go that way. Now, in terms of private practitioners, of course, it can be a bit of a minefield. And I would say if you were looking and wanting and able to kind of buy in a service, if you like, from a private practitioner, of course, if you can know of another professional who could make a referral or could recommend someone. If not, then there are certain agencies. Look, I'm a member of the British Association of Counsellor and Psychotherapists. So I would be registered, I would be accredited, I would be on their website. So there's something to check us out, and I think there are loads of websites with young people counsellors on, with thousands of counsellors on. So I often think going through a like British Association of Counsellors, Therapists, Psychotherapists is somewhere the safety net. But I always say that if you know a friend who's used a counsellor, then maybe get a recommendation.
Amazing. Yeah, it's just, I know there are a lot of parents that are worried about the cumulative effect, if nothing else, of the pandemic, the constant changes, the not really knowing what's going on with exams particularly. It's that snowball effect.
No,
absolutely.
I was just talking to some students this morning and online, and I think just year 13, just not knowing, and that's kind of what the anxiety is. What is, okay, we were going to just set ourselves up to take the A-levels, that was it. Now we're not clear, the schools aren't clear, the government haven't, I understand the consultation had just finished on Friday, so we're not clear of what the assessments entail. So, and of course, you know, I'm a parent with a child in a year 13 and year 11. So I'm quite anxious about it, and kind of getting ready to make appeals and all sorts of things. But for young people and children, yeah, it's just like not knowing is really, really difficult. So there is no easy answer. And I think you're right in terms of a cumulative, the sense of that we've been in this lockdown really for nigh on a year, often a few ways out, but not knowing when it's going to finish. And even they could even be thinking of their future. If they're year 13s, thinking, well, do I take a gap year? Do I go to university? So it goes on. So anxiety is definitely one of the key areas that I work with young people, absolutely, and have done before COVID. So yes.
But I'm assuming that's on the increase with COVID. The anxiety issues that have been brought to you are ever increasing.
I think that, yes, I would say that it's not just anxiety. I think for some young people I work with, not being in school is really good for them. They actually like it. They're thriving in terms of, you know, so it might be young people who have struggled in school. There might be some friendship issues. There might be bullying issues. So for them, being at home is quite safe. But I think in terms of some of the concerns that I have in terms of children and young people, that sense of kind of losing socialization skills and the anxiety of meeting people again. What do we do? Do we touch? Do we hug? When do we do that? You know, how do we socialize? Losing friendships, different friendships groups forming online. So there's all sorts of, I think, anxieties about not just academic work, but in terms of friendships, and what will that mean? And will some children and young people lose the skills or lack confidence in terms of making friendships and having, you know, like almost like, okay, COVID's over, we can all go back, you know, that could be quite frightening. I mean, yes, but that could be quite frightening for some young people who have been basically locked up in their room for the past 6 to 8 months.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, our daughter's in year 7, so she's had very little actual secondary school experience that hasn't been, and none, in fact, that hasn't been impacted by COVID. And so she doesn't even know what normal is going to be. She can't even imagine what it's going to be like when she gets back to that. So exactly. It's, as you said earlier, it's the lack of control over the situation that I know is what I find the most frustrating, is that there's nothing more I can do other than stay in my house. And, you know. You do get
a bit frustrated listening to various government announcements, knowing that there's absolutely nothing you can do about it. It's all, you've got to sit there and take the news as it comes.
And that's the thing, isn't it? I think if nothing else, there's a sense of powerlessness, and certainly there has been a sense of hopelessness when we're just, you know, with the amount of deaths we had, and we're not saying, yes, we've got the vaccine, so there is some hope, but yeah, I think powerlessness is a really difficult one, because most of us, of course, children and young people also, you know, we like to have some element of control in our lives, and some of us as adults, we do still have that, but on the biggest picture, you know, certainly for us who maybe want to socialize with friends or go out and do the things that we used to, we have very little control about that.
So is it worth considering, if you know that that's something that is affecting your child, finding things that they can have control over at the moment? Because I know we have battles about things like whether her room is tidy and so on. Is there an argument for the sake of sanity and mental health to say, you know what, there are some things that normally we'd put our foot down about, but in this situation, I need you to feel like you have control of some stuff?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting kind of thought, isn't it? And I look, you know, I think what I'm aware of when I work with children and young people, I'm always aware of the power dynamic. And I'm always aware that children and young people are generally powerless to what happens in their family. You know, so classically divorce or moving house, or, you know, that they've got no say, generally no say at all. So for me, how children and young people maintain some element of control. Now, of course, I work with young people who there may be some family disruption, something going on in the family, might be arguments with the parents. How do they deal with that? Well, they often deal with that by creating rituals, little rituals that they will do to make sure that they've got some control of some thing that they know they can do, and no one can take off them. And that is a form of just them having some sense of control. So in terms of coming back to your question about the room tidy, I think for me, it is always a journey, isn't it, as parents, of what battles to pick and what to let go. Is it, is it worth it? Is it, what importance have we put on that particular value or behavior? And I know that as my children have got bigger, of course, the expectations have shifted quite a lot, in different what I expect of them in certain ways. That could be about tidiness or their chores or their language and stuff like that. And so for me, I think there's often a growth as a parent. We're growing with our children and young people, and I think, yes, during COVID, is a tidy room an important thing for that particular child, or is it more about for the parent? For some children and young people, they might feel they have order, and they normally keep a tidy room. And if we're finding, oh, hold on, your room's not as tidy as it was, is it, maybe would be an interesting point to say, well, why have they let their tidiness go? And I think that would be a really important thing to kind of check out with them. But for as a parent, I know that my kind of rules and expectations definitely have flowed and have changed. For one example, in terms of, we could talk about screen usage. It's kind of, we're all doing it now, all the time. That's all we've got. And how do not only we work and young people do all their education on screen, but then we were having battles not so many moons ago about their leisure time with screens. But now for me, it's like, well, yeah, go to your screens, be with your friends. If you're online with your friends, that's the way I want you to do that, because ultimately there's nothing else apart from them getting out of the house, perhaps definitely walking the dog once a day, and maybe trying to do some exercise. So do you know what I mean? We've got to flow with different things.
But if you're in an online lesson, turn your phone off. That could be a lesson, possibly.
That would be an excellent lesson, yes.
I think that's a great learning, isn't it? That we should make sure we tell our children to always do that, and we don't do it.
I'm sure I turned notifications off before we did this, but it was a discussion I had in my own head, and nothing actually happened.
So let's wrap up. Can we press you, just to put you on the spot here, for your 3 top tips then for parents who know they have some bad news to break to their teenager?
You can do, and I think I've probably already covered my top tips, but I'll just go through them. So the first top tip, I think, is creating an emotionally fit environment. So it's not just at the bad news, it's from outset. How are we going to be able to show and model to our young people that, look, it's okay to express any emotion? And I would say, look, even anger. Anger to me is a really important emotion. It's often I'll say, look, there's healthy ways of expressing anger. There's unhealthy ways of expressing anger. But even unhealthy ways, let's listen to that anger. Let's not shut it down. I'm not although I teach anger management classes, I'm not really into anger management. I'm more into anger awareness. I want to understand what that anger is about. I want to listen to that. So let's not get offended by anger. Let's listen to it, because I think it's often a kind of, there's a problem here, there's something going on, so let's listen to that. So in terms of developing an emotionally fit environment, I think is number 1. The second one is listen attentively and empathically. We talked about that a little bit earlier. Make sure that we have got our ears on. Often people say we've got 2 ears and 1 mouth. So So let's actually practice listening, not just listening to the words that are said. Let's listen to the words that are unsaid. Let's listen to their body language. Let's listen. What do we see? What do we notice? And let's kind of maybe even reflect back to them. The great thing about empathy is, look, you know, if we can pick up their feelings, this is part of emotional fitness. They might be angry, for instance. We might actually think, I can hear your anger, but I can see your sadness. So that even to reflect back something that we see that they might not be aware of, that is empathic practice. The third tip I'd say is to, in terms of embracing failure. Now, I think, you know, we in this generation, you know, when I was a boy, generally parents, we were underparented. You know, today we overparent. We want to, they call them the helicopter parents, don't they? We're always wanting to make sure our children are all right, mustn't get hurt or anything like that. Now, for me, to allow children to face disappointment, to face sadness, to face failure, to know that making a mistake is okay. The only mistake you can make is not learning from your mistakes. So to embrace those kind of difficult things and to feed that into our culture as a family. So for me, being able to embrace and celebrate, you know, the sense of that we're not always going to get it right. There are going to be flaws. And just as I add on to that, this is really important because I work with lots of young people who have bought into a kind of perfectionism. And the root under perfectionism is that if I'm not perfect, I won't be, or I feel I won't be accepted. I won't be loved. So for me to be able, that failure one, and to say it's okay, is really important.
Love it.
Fabulous. Thank you very, very much.
Some fantastic advice there. I think my big takeaway is just that being completely open and honest with them and not letting it, because you can read the room with the family, you know when there's something going on, and if you're not upfront about it,
Don't
then
sit on it.
Yeah, they spend all their time guessing. So that for me is a key takeaway as well. Anything you want to add?
No, thank you very much. Much
Awesome.
Appreciated.
Massive thank you for that.
Brilliant.
I know
Well, thanks.
very much
Thanks for having me.
appreciated.